Poveglia Island, a small landmass nestled in the Venetian Lagoon between Venice and Lido, has long been the subject of chilling tales and whispered fears. For centuries, it has been known as one of the most haunted places in the world. The island's terrifying history dates back to the darkest periods of European history, a place where death, suffering, and abandonment were all too familiar. This story, deeply rooted in truth, explores the eerie events that have made Poveglia Island a place shunned by locals and feared by travelers. The haunting of Poveglia begins during the height of the Black Death in the 14th century, a time when the plague swept through Europe, leaving death in its wake. Venice, a flourishing trade hub, was especially vulnerable, and the disease quickly infiltrated its narrow streets and waterways. To contain the spread of the plague, the Venetian authorities took drastic measures, and Poveglia Island was chosen as the final resting place for those infected. The infected were ferried to the island in droves, a grim procession of the living dead. Once on the island, they were left to die, surrounded by others suffering the same fate. The island became a mass grave, with bodies piling up in the fields and even thrown into hastily dug pits. Over time, it is said that more than 160,000 plague victims were buried there. The air grew thick with the smell of decay, and the island was soon associated with death and despair. No one ventured there unless they had to, and even those who did seldom returned without stories of ghostly apparitions and unnatural occurrences. Despite its gruesome past, Poveglia was not abandoned. In the 18th century, when plague outbreaks receded, the island remained isolated, yet it was occasionally used as a quarantine station for travelers and sailors who might be carrying infectious diseases. Again, those who came to Poveglia were often left to die, and the island's sinister reputation only deepened. Then, in the late 19th century, a new chapter of horror was added to Poveglia's already dark history. A mental asylum was built on the island in 1922, and it is here that the most chilling stories originate. The asylum was intended to house Venice's mentally ill patients, but it quickly became a place of unimaginable suffering. Medical practices of the time were primitive, and the asylum was known for its inhumane treatment of patients. Stories spread about cruel experiments carried out by doctors, some of whom were more interested in testing out controversial techniques than in helping the mentally ill. One such doctor, whose name has been lost to history, was particularly notorious. He is said to have performed horrific lobotomies and other gruesome procedures on patients, often without anesthesia or proper care. His madness, it is said, eventually consumed him. Locals began to whisper that the doctor himself had started seeing the tortured souls of those who had died on the island, their tormented spirits seeking revenge for the pain he had inflicted. According to legend, the doctor eventually lost his grip on reality. He claimed to hear voices and see figures in the dark corners of the asylum, shadowy forms that watched him as he went about his grim work. The more he tried to silence the spirits, the louder they became. Finally, in a moment of utter madness, the doctor climbed the top of the asylum's bell tower and threw himself to his death. Some say that he didn't die on impact, but was found lying on the ground, broken but still alive. In those final moments, witnesses claimed to have seen a misty form hovering over his body, as if the spirits of the island had come to collect their due. He died shortly after, and his body was buried somewhere on the island. After the doctor's death, the asylum was abandoned. No one dared to set foot on Poveglia anymore, and the island became a ghostly place, its crumbling buildings overgrown with ivy, its empty windows staring out over the lagoon like hollow eyes. The bell tower, where the doctor met his end, still stands, though the bell itself was removed long ago. Even so, visitors to the island have reported hearing the faint sound of a bell ringing in the dead of night, echoing across the water as if to remind the living of the island's gruesome past. Poveglia's reputation as a haunted place grew over the years. Fishermen from nearby villages steered clear of its shores, and even the most skeptical refused to go near it. Some said that the spirits of the plague victims still wandered the island, while others believed that the tortured souls from the asylum roamed its dark corridors, unable to find peace. In modern times, Poveglia remains largely off-limits, its dark history too overwhelming for anyone to reclaim it. The Italian government has made several attempts to sell the island to private investors, but each time, something has gone wrong. Developers have reported strange occurrences, from ghostly sightings to inexplicable accidents, and no one has been able to stay on the island for long. Even those who have tried to debunk the island's legends have left with a sense of unease. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators who have ventured to Poveglia speak of cold spots, sudden gusts of wind, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Some have claimed to hear whispers in the darkness, disembodied voices calling out in languages long forgotten. Others have reported seeing figures in the distance, only for them to disappear when approached. Yet perhaps the most disturbing of all are the stories of those who have been brave enough, or foolish enough, to stay the night on Poveglia. In 1968, a group of thrill-seeking teenagers from Venice took a boat to the island, hoping to prove that the tales were just local folklore. They camped in the ruins of the asylum, laughing off the warnings of the villagers. But as night fell, the mood changed. One by one, the group began to experience strange phenomena. Doors slamming shut on their own, footsteps echoing in empty halls, and the sound of whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. The terror grew as the night wore on. One member of the group claimed to see a shadowy figure standing in the bell tower, watching them with cold, dead eyes. Unable to take the mounting fear, the teenagers fled the island in the early hours of the morning, leaving their belongings behind. They later spoke of an overwhelming sense of dread that had followed them all the way back to Venice. Though no one was physically harmed, they never returned to Poveglia, and their story became just one more in the long list of unsettling tales surrounding the island. Over time, the legend of Poveglia has only grown, with each new generation adding their own accounts of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena. Despite its dark history and chilling reputation, Poveglia Island continued to attract a certain type of person. Those fascinated by the supernatural, thrill seekers, and even some who dismissed the tales as mere superstition, ventured to the island in search of answers, or simply to prove their bravery. However, many of these expeditions ended with more questions than they began with, and the island's eerie atmosphere left a lasting impact on those who dared to explore it. In the 1970s, one such investigation was carried out by a group of scientists and paranormal researchers. Determined to debunk the stories of hauntings, they set up equipment throughout the crumbling asylum and other ruins on the island. For the first few hours, nothing unusual happened, and the team began to feel as though they were wasting their time. However, just after midnight, things began to change. Several members reported hearing strange noises, like faint cries and moans, coming from the direction of the old bell tower. They dismissed these as tricks of the wind or the natural sounds of an abandoned place, but the atmosphere in the group shifted. The following morning, one of the researchers, a skeptical man who had previously mocked the idea of ghosts, was found in a state of panic. He claimed to have been woken in the night by the feeling of cold hands wrapping around his throat. Though there were no visible marks on his neck, he was visibly shaken, refusing to spend another night on the island. The group cut their investigation short, leaving Poveglia behind with no concrete evidence, but a deeper respect for the island's mysterious power. In the years that followed, Poveglia became a forbidden place in more than just legend. The Italian government officially closed the island to the public, making it illegal to visit without permission. Yet, the island's haunting allure persisted, drawing curious visitors despite the warnings. Fishermen continued to avoid its waters, claiming that the fish around Poveglia were somehow tainted. Those who disregarded the rules and ventured onto the island reported strange sensations: overwhelming dread, sudden temperature drops, and the distinct feeling that they were not alone. One of the most famous modern accounts came from a family who bought the island in the early 2000s with plans to build a vacation home. The family stayed only one night before abandoning their dream. According to their testimony, they were terrorized by horrific visions and sounds throughout the night. Their daughter awoke with unexplained cuts and bruises on her body, and the parents, horrified, fled the island at first light, vowing never to return. They spoke of shadowy figures moving through the trees and disembodied voices that seemed to follow them wherever they went. Today, Poveglia remains a place of mystery and fear. Though it stands empty, its dark history continues to cast a long shadow over the Venetian Lagoon. The crumbling asylum, the towering bell, and the plague pits lie untouched, reminders of the island's tragic past. Locals still speak of Poveglia in hushed tones, and while no one dares to live there, its stories endure. The haunting of Poveglia Island is not just a tale of ghosts, but a reminder of the human suffering that once filled its shores. Whether one believes in spirits or not, the island's dark energy is undeniable, and its legacy as one of the most haunted places in the world will likely remain unchallenged for generations to come.